Hi guys, welcome back. For most of medical history, the menstrual cycle was studied almost exclusively as a reproductive process, something that happened in the body every month, largely separate from everything else. Mood, cognition, metabolism, brain structure, athletic performance, even the way the brain responds to food. Scientists have now discovered this understanding was completely wrong. The menstrual cycle doesn't just affect reproduction. According to research published as recently as June 2026 in Frontiers in Cognition, it is a major biological event with extensive effects on the brain and cognition, experienced by half the global population, that science has only begun to seriously understand. In the next few minutes, you are going to discover exactly how the four phases of the menstrual cycle create measurably different brain states throughout the month, what a 2025 meta-analysis found about memory and attention performance peaking at a specific phase of the cycle, how a January 2026 study published in Communications Biology showed the brain's response to food and insulin changes dynamically across the cycle, why hippocampal structure itself has been shown to change across the month, and what the practical implications of all this research mean for how you train, eat, work, and live. Let's get into it. To understand what the research is finding, you first need a clear picture of what the menstrual cycle actually involves biologically, because this is not simply about menstruation. It is about four distinct hormonal phases, each creating a fundamentally different internal environment that the brain and body must operate within. Phase 1 is the menstrual phase, roughly days 1 through 5, when estrogen and progesterone are both at their lowest. Energy levels are often reduced and inflammatory signaling is elevated. The internal environment is one of low hormonal stimulation. Phase 2 is the follicular phase, roughly days 6 through 13, when estrogen rises steadily toward its peak. Researchers consistently identify this as a phase of increasing energy, cognitive sharpness, and social engagement. The rising estrogen is directly influencing neurotransmitter activity throughout the brain. Phase 3 is ovulation, around day 14, marked by a sharp surge in luteinizing hormone and the highest estrogen levels of the cycle. This is the biological peak. Phase 4 is the luteal phase, roughly days 15 through 28, when progesterone rises significantly alongside a secondary estrogen peak, before both hormones drop sharply if pregnancy does not occur. This drop is what triggers the next menstrual phase, completing the cycle. Most people think of these phases as background reproductive biology. The research is now showing they create measurably different cognitive and neurological environments throughout the entire month. Here is what almost nobody knows about what's actually happening in the brain. Hippocampal structure, the physical size and connectivity of the brain region, most responsible for memory formation and spatial reasoning, has been documented to vary measurably across the menstrual cycle in multiple neuroimaging studies. The hippocampus doesn't stay the same throughout the month. It changes with the hormonal environment it's operating within. And a study published in Biology in August 2025, testing 71 young adults, found something specific and striking. Women performed significantly better on memory and attention tasks just before ovulation, during the pre-ovulatory phase when estradiol is at its highest, compared to performance during the menstrual phase when hormones are at their lowest. Differences in processing speed between men and women were only observed during women's menstrual phase, when female hormonal levels were lowest. This finding suggests that comparing cognitive performance between men and women without accounting for menstrual cycle phase has been producing systematically misleading results in research for decades. The data looks completely different depending on where in the cycle it was collected. But this is only part of the story, because the 2025 plus one meta-analysis, the largest analysis of this question to date, synthesizing dozens of studies, found something that requires honest communication. The effects on cognition are real, but their size depends heavily on the methodology used to measure them. Some robust effects were found, particularly in spatial performance during the luteal versus follicular phase comparison, but the researchers also found that less rigorous studies tended to find larger effects than hormone-confirmed studies. The science is real, but it is also nuanced, and it's important to say that clearly. Here's where this gets genuinely fascinating, and where the most recent research is pointing. A study published in Communications Biology in January 2026 investigated something nobody had specifically studied before: how the brain's response to insulin changes across the menstrual cycle. This matters enormously because insulin's effects in the brain are not the same as in peripheral tissues. In the brain, insulin influences appetite regulation, reward signaling, memory, and emotional processing. And the 2026 study found that central insulin effects on brain networks in the hippocampus and striatum vary dynamically across the menstrual cycle, with estradiol and progesterone directly predicting these changes. In practical terms, how your brain processes food, reward, and appetite is not constant across the month. It shifts with your hormonal cycle. This helps explain why food cravings, appetite, and emotional responses to eating can feel genuinely different at different points in the month, because neurologically they are different. The brain itself is in a different state. This directly connects to metabolism. Research also shows that carbohydrate and fat oxidation ratios shift across the cycle, with the luteal phase associated with greater fat oxidation and slightly different cortisol responses to exercise. The same workout performed at different points in the cycle produces different metabolic outcomes, not dramatically different, but measurably so in controlled studies. And for athletic performance specifically, a study published in the journal Sports Medicine in October 2025 from researchers at University College London and the University of Exeter examined how the menstrual cycle and athletic training interact to influence symptoms, mood, and cognition. The study found that athletic status did interact with cycle phase on cognitive and mood outcomes, meaning that training level moderated how strongly the cycle affected cognitive performance. But here's where most people get this completely wrong. Most of the popular conversation around the menstrual cycle and performance focuses on limitations, on the phases where energy is lower or symptoms are more prominent. The research actually points to a more complex and more empowering picture. The follicular phase, and particularly the pre-ovulatory window, represents a genuine neurological high point for many women. Rising estrogen enhances dopaminergic and serotonergic transmission, sharpens working memory, and promotes approach-oriented motivation. The research from Frontiers in Cognition published in June 2026, which introduced a new standardized method for studying cycle effects on brain and cognition, specifically described menstrual cycles as having extensive effects on both neural network connectivity and task-based brain activation, and called for cognitive science to integrate this reality into its standard research frameworks rather than treating it as a confounding variable to be eliminated. The luteal phase is more complex. Rising progesterone has calming, sometimes sedating effects through GABAergic pathways, which can support certain types of focused, sustained attention while reducing some dimensions of social energy. For some women, this phase is associated with greater sensitivity to stressors, partly mediated by shifts in how the HPA axis responds to cortisol during this hormonal environment. The research on ADHD and the menstrual cycle is particularly illuminating here. A review published in 2025 examining 29 studies found that women with ADHD experience pronounced hormone-related changes in attention, executive functioning, working memory, and inhibitory control across the cycle E, with some phases dramatically amplifying ADHD symptoms and others offering relative clarity. This isn't a minor or marginal effect. For many women, understanding their cycle is understanding why their brain performs so differently from one week to the next. So, what does all of this research actually mean practically? The first implication is that cycle tracking is not just a reproductive tool, it is a cognitive and performance tool. Understanding which phase you are in explains variation in energy, social drive, focus, and emotional sensitivity that might otherwise seem random or attributable to external circumstances. The follicular phase and pre-ovulatory window are consistently associated with higher estrogen, sharper memory and attention, and stronger social motivation. Research supports scheduling cognitively demanding work, important presentations, and high-intensity training during this window where possible. The luteal phase's progesterone dominance supports different strengths, sustained focus in quieter environments, reduced external stimulation seeking, potentially stronger performance on certain types of deliberate, methodical tasks. The same person's brain is genuinely operating in a different neurological context. Nutrition matters differently across the cycle as well. The shifts in insulin sensitivity and food cue reactivity documented in the 2026 Communications Biology study suggest that carbohydrate timing and composition may have different effects in different phases. The luteal phase's shift toward greater fat oxidation is relevant for athletes optimizing their nutrition across the month. And the most important practical implication may be the simplest. The variation you feel across the month is not weakness, inconsistency, or emotional instability. It is biology operating exactly as it was designed, cycling through 4 distinct hormonal environments, each shaping your brain and body in measurable, documented, predictable ways. Let me bring everything together. The menstrual cycle is not a reproductive background process running separately from the rest of life. It is a dynamic biological event that changes hippocampal structure, shifts neurotransmitter activity, alters how the brain responds to insulin and food cues, modulates athletic and cognitive performance, and creates 4 genuinely different internal environments across roughly 28 days, every month across decades of life. Research published in 2025 and 2026 has moved this beyond preliminary observations. Frontiers in Cognition called for cognitive science to fundamentally integrate menstrual cycle effects into how it understands human cognition. Communications biology documented dynamic brain network changes across the cycle. Multiple controlled studies have shown measurable cognitive differences tied to specific cycle phases. Half the human population has been navigating this complexity every month, often without a scientific framework to understand what they're experiencing. That framework now exists. The real question was never, why do I feel different at different times of the month? The real question is, now that the science has finally caught up, are you going to use it? If this gave you a completely new way to understand your own body, subscribe, because next week we go even deeper into the science of how biology shapes the mind and body in ways most people have never been told. See you in the next one.